In this video, we're going to look into using a vintage American-made tape machine inside your Cubase mixes and productions. Let's check it out. This is kind of a unique machine in the sense that it's a JH110C by MCI, but it's a half-inch mastering deck as opposed to the more common quarter-inch mastering deck. And we want all of that sort of sonic characteristic and unusual kind of analog tape chaos to end up in our Cubase project. So we're going to go through the workflow on how to kind of get all of our sound out of Cubase, through the signal path of the tape machine, and then back into our DAW, because we want all of the sort of analog mojo and goodness of this, but we want the speed and flexibility that Cubase offers us. So let's check it out. These techniques can really be used with just about any tape machine as long as there's some space between the record and reproduce heads. We need to be able to record onto the tape itself and then monitor off the reproduction head separately. Machines with combo heads will simply pass it through the hardware and eliminate the tape path altogether. And it goes without saying that any calibrations or cleaning or maintenance the machine might need is going to have to be done way ahead of time. The entire tape path comes in contact with lots of moving and metal parts. The oxides from the tape formulation, as well as the magnetic properties of the head, can cause a lot of buildup. As you can see, the heads get dirty quick. This is just a few passes of a 6-minute song. An older tape stock like 456 sheds a lot, as you can see here. So you're going to be cleaning in between each one of your takes. This is just part of owning a tape machine. The workflow is actually pretty straightforward once you get used to it, and you just need to factor in the extra time, especially if you're going to be doing this in between your live sessions, as well as any calibrations that need to be done. So if you have electronic calibrations that deal with tape tension, or take-up speeds, or capstan speeds, or any of those kinds of things, those all need to be done ahead of time, as they dramatically affect the quality of the playback. The idea here is to get all of that tape goodness and analog mojo without any of the problems. We don't want any of the wow and flutter and tape stretch and speed problems and all the other stuff that can make working with a tape machine a nightmare. Instead, we really want all that analog mojo to make it intact over to our Cubase projects and mixes. But we also need it good enough quality to actually be able to add to the project and not throw things wildly out of sync. Once all the maintenance has been completed, it's time to get audio out of our Cubase session, over to the tape machine, and back to our session. And while this is possible with a 2x2 audio interface, it's a lot easier to do with a multi-track audio interface, or at least using a mixer that allows you to change up the routing and monitor your playback and record channels much easier. I've done several videos on how to use a mixer with your audio interface and all of the advantages and routing options that provides, and I'll leave that info in the links below. So over here in our Cubase project, we have a mix that's already in process. This is a great Northwest artist. Her name is Shaene Pascal. The mix sounds like this.
Started melting. And how's the family? Are you still buying you CDs?
Shaene is just a super talented singer-songwriter, and I'll leave all her information in the links below so you guys can check her out. So we're basically going to create a real-time audio loop from our project to the tape machine and back. So the first thing we're going to do is send our main audio outputs over to the tape machine. If you're just using a 2-in, 2-out audio interface, you'll need to unplug your outputs from your monitors and plug those into the tape machine and monitor from headphones. This is where having a multi-track audio interface really pays off when it comes to the additional routing options. That signal is going to go into the tape machine. It's going to go straight onto our record heads, onto tape, and then immediately get read back off of it from the reproduce head. And from there, it's going to go straight back into our Cubase session, but we need to create a new pair of inputs to record that result. So we're going to title those additional inputs tape returns. We're going to assign them a set of stereo inputs so that we can assign the tracks to them in our project. If we right-click on any of the tracks inside of our current project, that brings up the Create Audio Track dialog box. From here, we can create tracks that have specific inputs and outputs. We're going to assign our outputs directly to our main outputs. We're going to title this track Tape Bounce. With our outputs configured and set inside of our Cubase project, it's time to come over to the tape machine and put it in input mode so that we can check the levels that are going to be going to tape. This determines how hard we're going to be hitting the tape and make sure that our levels are perfect for this particular kind of tape that we're using. Once that's done, we want to arm the track just like we would inside of Cubase. And then we're going to put the machine in reproduce mode so that we're actually reading off the playback head. Once the tape inputs are set, we press the play and record button, and that puts our tape machine into record mode. Back in Cubase, we simply arm our newly created track and we begin the recording process in our project, which creates the entire audio loop in real time. Since this is a real-time process, we actually are recording the entire thing as it's occurring and playing back. So if it's a 6-minute song, it's a 6-minute process, and so on. If you end up with really big projects, this can take a considerable amount of time. This is why we're not just recording onto the tape machine and then once done, rewinding it and then playing it all back and then recording that inside of Cubase. Since it's a real-time process, it's going to take the entire performance length each time we do that step. So by recording straight onto the tape and immediately monitoring off the repro head, which is only a little less than a half a second of distance, we save ourselves that extra step of having to play it back for the entire performance length each time. Once our completed mix has made the round trip over to the tape machine and back into our Cubase project, we can now adjust our mix levels to match our existing mix and compare the results. So as you can see and hear, we're getting a really nice kind of low-end bump as well as rolling off some of the more sibilant high end. And in addition, we're also getting some of that tape compression as well. And that's really helping to glue the whole thing together and give us that kind of warm analog feel and vibe and character. And on this mix, it does a really nice job of that.
It's the way it misbehaves that really is responsible for its kind of analog character. And that's what we're after. We really want that analog kind of sound. So there's a lot of different kinds of tapes that we can use, but we're actually using vintage NOS or new old stock Ampex 456. And this is tape that is brand new, that was in storage. And tape this old has a lot of considerations you have to deal with. There's things like baking and shedding and a lot of other things like that. But the advantage is it has a ton of analog mojo. So there's a few things to consider when you're using mechanical equipment along with your DAW. And that's just the physical aspect of the gear itself. So this gear, if you listen to it, has got a pretty significant noise floor. So that's just the power supply and the fan. And then by the time you consider, the transport, rewind, all that kind of stuff, you got to factor that into your mix environment.
In this next example, we've got a modern rock song with several different acoustic drum sections in it. Sounds like this.
How many times do I have to say that it cuts me to the quick?
So in this song, we want to bounce just the drum section by itself over to the tape machine and back. We want to be able to get a bit of a bump on the low end and also knock off some of that high end where the really abrasive cymbals are. In addition, we want to get some of that tape compression as well to kind of help glue it all together again. So we're going to go up to our input sections here, and we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous example. We're going to create our own set of inputs called tape returns. We'll assign them inputs on our audio interface so that we can assign our tracks in our project to those new inputs. We'll click the plus button up here. We can also right-click on any of the track space here to open up the Add Track dialog box. We'll assign its audio inputs to the new inputs on our audio interface that we just created, and we'll title the track Tape Returns. This is going to be a stereo track, and this completes our loop that's going to go out of Cubase, over to the tape machine, and then back to our Tape Returns track here. From here, we're going to take all of the drum folders themselves and solo them so that only those go to our stereo outputs. And we're also going to disable any of the downstream processing on our master bus so that it's just the drum tracks themselves going over to the tape machine. In addition, we're also going to put a count in at the start of the drum performance because there'll be a few milliseconds off of each other because of the distance between the record and the reproduce heads. This allows us to quickly and easily line up our tape return recording with our existing drum tracks inside of Cubase. Just like before, we check the levels going into our tape machine, and we want to make sure that we've got good strong levels. We want to get all of that great tape compression that we can into the track itself. Once our levels look good, we put the tape machine into record mode, we arm our track in Cubase, and we start recording inside our project. And just like before, this is a real-time process, so if you have a lot of material to do, you have to factor that into your workflow. Once our tape bounce is complete and we're back inside our Cubase session here, we're going to unmute our folders so that we can hear the original drum sound and compare it against our tape bounce recording. But before we can do that, we need to line up our tape bounce recording to the position of the original drum track. And this is where those intro clicks are going to come in handy. We're going to expand the wave all the way out, and then we can easily line these up to those click marker indicators, allowing our tape bounce recording to play back in exactly the same position as our original drum recording does.
Tell me right now what you wanna say, 'cause every time I take a chance, it always ends this way, with me shot down, realize that you're thing to say, so I'm shot down, bury the knife, then you walk away.
So as you can hear, just like in the previous example, we've got a lot of tape compression going on here, and even after the levels are matched, we've got quite a bit more volume because of that compression, in addition to getting a low-end bump and also rolling off those abrasive high-end cymbal crashes and hi-hats, and it makes for a great overall punchy and vibey analog mix to the drum tracks. And the same process can be done for every track in the project if you wanted to devote that much time to it. So you obviously could never have a 200-track tape machine, but you can easily have that here by using these techniques inside of Cubase in conjunction with the tape machine. So that's a look at using vintage hardware inside your Cubase mixes and productions. And as you can see, there's a lot of variables to it, but when you get it right, it sounds great, and it is worth the hassle just because it adds so much character and so much kind of vibiness to your productions and your mixes. Hey, if you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep the channel going, helps me make more videos like this. Stay safe and be creative. Add something creative to the world. It could really use it. We'll catch you guys in the next video.